Next year marks 30 years of Oregon's Death with Dignity law. When the right conditions are met, it allows people to end their life with a mix of medications. It was the first time any state legalized end-of-life care. Now, a new bill signed by Governor Kotek changes the law. More on that in a little bit. Let's stay in the past for just a second. The bill was controversial, as you might expect, when it first passed in the mid-90s and faced all kinds of challenges along the way. Ashley Grams walks us through the timeline of how this all came to be, answering the question, how did we get here?
Long before voters went to the ballot box, Oregonians were fighting for death with dignity and a way to end their lives on their own time. One man who was losing his daily life to Parkinson's was fighting for this law back in 1990, but his daughter wasn't so sure she could support his wishes.
Bob's family knows he wants someone to help him die when the time comes. Bev Ickes respects her father's wishes, but doesn't want him to end his life prematurely.
For that reason, I'm almost glad there is nothing available to him at this point to end his life.
In 1994, Oregon voters first approved Measure 16, the Death with Dignity Act, and it was a close vote, 51 to 49%. For many, it came down to personal control of their end-of-life care.
I have always felt in my entire adult life that people should be able to control the timing and the nature of their death.
But the law didn't go into effect right away. The U.S. District Court in Eugene imposed an injunction after the National Right to Life group challenged the measure. Religious groups, including the Catholic Diocese here in Portland, opposed the measure.
The Sisters of Providence has come out against Measure 16, but the other hospitals in the area, including Legacy, OHSU, and Portland Adventist, remain neutral.
Our best medical, nursing, social, and spiritual resources will be applied to counter the pain, the isolation, the loneliness that often causes the greatest suffering to dying persons.
For 3 years, the Death with Dignity Act hung in the balance. Then in 1997, a second initiative, Measure 51, was sent to voters by the state legislature, this time trying to repeal the original measure. But Oregon voters rejected Measure 51, allowing the Death with Dignity Act to stand.
The law that we passed has made life better for every dying and suffering person in Oregon.
Although the law was in place and patients were allowed access to end-of-life services, there were more challenges. In 2005, President George Bush's administration petitioned the Supreme Court to hear their case against the law. The next year, in a 6-3 vote, the Supreme Court upheld the Oregon law. And Pat, you actually reported on this decision as the Supreme Court was hearing this case, and when I looked at your story, it was just really very emotional.
Yeah, it was, as you can imagine. I mean, it's an end-of-life decision for people, and that case specifically focused on the medicines that were going to be used, and that's how the Supreme Court ruled on it. But, you know, it really is such a personal decision for people, and I remember talking to one gentleman who was thinking about using the law and just how difficult it was for him to make that call.
And Richard Holmes hopes the challenge is successful. He would like to have at least the choice of using Oregon's assisted suicide law.
And I want to be able to end my life on my terms.
After Oregon's law cleared the Supreme Court, other states began considering their own versions, including Washington state. And now, Ashley, I guess it sounds like almost 30 years later, there's a new wrinkle in Oregon's law.
Right, Pat. So it's going to be even easier for anyone across the country to come to Oregon and to use this law. OHA tells me that in 2022, nearly 300 people took the lethal dose of prescription medications to end their own lives. Now there are qualifications in place in order to get those medications in the first place. The person must be at least 18 years old, be able to understand and communicate their decisions, have 6 months or less to live due to an illness or disease, and until recently, patients had to be an Oregon resident. But during this legislative session, lawmakers voted to repeal that last point. Now, anyone in the country can come to Oregon and apply for lethal medication to end their life.
It's hard enough to go through the process. We'd like to remove this access barrier.
That's Dr. Nick Gideons, an Oregon physician talking to KGW in 2021.
At the time, he filed a lawsuit claiming the requirement to be an Oregon resident in the Death with Dignity Act was unconstitutional. Even though death with dignity was legal in both Oregon and Washington, Dr. Gideons could not write an end-of-life prescription for his Washington patients.
We want patients who are eligible for medical aid in dying to be able to pursue that. And to us, this is, particularly Washington, because it's legal there. We want to remove the river as a barrier.
Less than a year later, the lawsuit was settled. The Oregon Health Authority explains.
The settlement terms included the agreement that we would not enforce the residency requirements any longer.
Even though it was no longer being enforced, it wasn't until this year, 2023, that lawmakers introduced House Bill 2279 to enshrine that part of the settlement into state law.
And so instead of having the state go back into another lawsuit costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, it is best for us to go ahead and do what has been agreed to through the court process.
The bill passed and Governor Kotek signed it July 13th. The Oregon Health Authority tells me at least 3 people from out of state have received the lethal prescriptions, but that's not a full count. Because while they can come to Oregon, they do not have to die in Oregon. They can get the medication and take it back home to their state. The health authority says it's perfectly legal.
If somebody uses the Oregon's law, but then actually goes back to their home state, we would actually not necessarily know because we don't receive the death certificate from another state.
It's worth noting removing the residency requirement does not change the other necessary steps it takes to get approved.
Ashley joins me now. Super interesting story going back into the past and all that. What got you interested in this?
Right. Great question. So I recently moved here from Nevada, and when I was in Nevada, I was actually covering the 2023 legislative session there, and they were trying to pass this law in Nevada. So death with dignity is not allowed in Nevada right now, and so I got to hear from a lot of interesting people who were both for and against it.
And then once you did get here, Oregon was talking about this update, and so you went down to our legislature, right?
Right. I saw that this was coming up as a possible change, and I thought it was really interesting. And so that was when I started kind of looking at it, and then to see that it did pass and the governor did sign it, I kind of wanted to look into it a little bit more.
And I know you were there as some people were testifying in favor of it, people maybe from out of state who wanted to possibly use it to end their lives. What was that like?
It's emotional. As you said, when people are talking about death, right, it's really intimate, and it's a really intimate decision for them. And so a lot of emotional tears, a lot of people talking about loved ones, on the brink of death. So it was difficult to listen to people going through those moments in their life.
Yeah, well, great reporting. I appreciate you bringing us this update. Thanks a lot. So what do you think about the new change in the death with dignity law for Oregon? Or maybe you have thoughts about the law itself through the years. Send us an email, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090.